So why is it private? It's supposed to be public. So we're in Joshua 5. So it says, when all the Amorites, king west of the Jordan, and all the Canaanite kings who lived along the Mediterranean coast, how do you say that? Mediterranean coast, heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan River, so the people of Israel could cross. They lost their heart and were paralyzed with fear because of them. At that time, the Lord told Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the second generation of Israelites. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the entire male population of Israel at Gibeah. Joshua had to circumcise them because all the men who were old enough to fight in battle when they left Egypt had died in the wilderness. Those who left Egypt had all been circumcised, but none of those born after the Exodus during the years in the wilderness had been circumcised. The Israelites had traveled in the wilderness for 40 years until all the men who were old enough to fight in battle. When they left Egypt, they died, for they had disobeyed the Lord, and the Lord vowed he would not let them enter the land he had sworn to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So Joshua circumcised their sons. So those who had grown up to take their father's place, for they had not been circumcised on the way to the promised land, after all the males had been circumcised, and they rested in the camp until they were young. And then the Lord said to Joshua, today I rolled away the shame of your slavery in Egypt, so that place that has been called Gilead to this day. While the Israelites were camped at Gilead on the plains of Jericho, they celebrate Passover that evening of the 14th day of the first month. The very next day, they began to eat unleavened bread and roasted grain harvest from the land. No manna appeared on that day. They first ate from the crops of the land, and it was never seen again. So from that time on, the Israelites ate from the crops of Canaan. When Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a sword in hand. Joshua went up to him and demanded, are you a friend or foe? Neither one, he replied. I am the commander of the Lord's army. At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. I am at your command, Joshua said. What do you want your servant to do? The commander of the Lord's army replied, take off your sandals, for this place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did as he was told. So Joshua chapter 5. That's the loud cars. So Joshua chapter 5. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand, and Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" Joshua encounters a mysterious figure with a drawn sword while near the city of Jericho. Uncertain of the stranger's alliance, Joshua approaches him and seeks clarification. This reverse reminds us of the importance of seeking God's guidance in perceptive and challenging situations instead of assuming our own agenda or assuming God is automatically on our side. Should approach him with humility and seek his wisdom. It teaches us to submit ourselves to God's sovereignty and align our will with his rather than expecting him to conform to our desires. Joshua verse 14, and he said, "No, but I am a commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth in worship and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" The mysterious figure reveals himself as the the commander of the army of the Lord. Joshua responds by falling on his face in worship and seeking further instruction. This verse highlights the appropriate response when encountering God's presence, worship, and humility. Joshua recognizes the authority of the Lord and submits himself as a servant, ready to receive instructions. Similarly, in our lives, we should approach God with reverence and a willingness to surrender for our plans, and align with his will. It reminds us to prioritize seeking God's guidance and to respond with a heart of worship. And the commander of the Lord army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for this place where you're standing is holy." And Joshua did so. The commander of the Lord's army instructs Joshua to remove his sandals, for the ground he is standing on is considered holy. This verse teaches us the importance of recognizing and honoring the holiness of God, just as Joshua was instructed to remove his sandals. We should approach God with reverence and respect. It reminds us that our encounters with God are sacred and should be treated with awe and humility. By acknowledging the holiness of God, we position ourselves to receive his guidance and blessings. In summary, Joshua 5 presents important lessons about seeking God's guidance, responding with worship and humility, and recognizing the holiness of his presence. By approaching God with humility, surrendering our own agendas, and acknowledging his authority, we can experience his guidance and blessings in our lives. These lessons remind us of the importance of aligning ourselves with God's will and seeking his wisdom in all circumstances. It's like they don't understand us. Certainly, you're referring to the well-known event of the burning bush where Moses encounters God's presence. Let's explore the relevant verses from Exodus 3. "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush was burning, and yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see the great sight, why the bush is not burnt. Moses, while tending to his flock, came across a bush that is on fire, but is not being consumed by the flames. Intrigued by this phenomena, Moses decides to investigate further. This verse reminds us that sometimes God captures our attention through extraordinary means. Just as Moses was drawn to the burning bush, we should be attentive and curious when we witness signs of God's presence or his work in our lives. It encourages us to have a posture of curiosity and openness, willing to turn aside from our routines and explore the ways in which God might be speaking to us. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses, and he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near, take out your sandals, and you, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. As Moses approaches the burning bush, God calls out to him by name. God instructs Moses to remove his sandals because the ground he is standing on is holy. This verse teaches us about the holiness of God's presence. The act of removing sandals symbolizes a reverent and humble posture before God. It reminds us to approach God with respect and awe, recognizing his holiness and authority, just as Moses was instructed to remove his sandals. We should be mindful of the sacredness of our encounters with God, both in times of extraordinary experiences in our lives, everyday lives. Exodus verse 6, and he said, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. God reveals his identity to Moses and introduces himself as the God of his ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses responds by hiding his face, overwhelmed by a sense of fear and reverence. This verse reminds us of the awe-inspiring nature of encountering God's presence. Just as Moses hid his face, we should approach God with humility and a deep respect for his majesty. It teaches us to encounter with God should evoke a sense of reverence and awe, and we should not take his presence lightly, but rather approach him with a posture of humility and respect. In summary, the account of the burning bush in Exodus 3 teaches us about being attentive to signs of God's presence, approaching him with reverence, and recognizing the holiness of his presence. It encourages us to have a posture of curiosity, humility, and awe when encountering God. These lessons remind us of the importance of being open to God's leading and humbly acknowledging his authority in our lives. So it would be like next, Joshua chapter 6. So Joshua chapter 6, the fall of Jericho. Now the gates of Jericho were tightly shut because the people were afraid of the Israelites. Go out or in. But the Lord said to Joshua, I have given you Jericho, its king, and all its strong warriors. You and your fighting men should march around the town once a day for 6 days. 7 priests will walk ahead of the ark and carrying a ram's horn. On the 7th, march around the town 7 times with the priests blowing the horns. When you hear the priest give one long blast on the ram's horn, have all the people shout out as loud as they can. Then the walls of the town will collapse, and the people can charge straight into the town. So Joshua called together the priests and said, take up the ark of the Lord's covenant and assign 7 priests to walk in front of it, each carrying a ram's horn. Then he gave orders to the people, march around the town, and armed men will lead the way in front of the ark of the Lord. After Joshua spoke to the people, the 7 priests of the ram's horn started marching in the presence of the Lord, blowing the horns as they marched, and the ark of the Lord followed behind them. Some of the armed men marched in front of the priests with their horns, and some behind the ark, with the priests continually blowing the horns. Do not shout, do not even talk, Joshua commanded. Not a single word from any of you until I tell you to shout. Then shout. So the ark of the Lord was carried around the town once that day, and then everyone returned to spend the night in the camp. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests again carried the ark of the Lord. And the 7 priests with the ram's horns marched in front of the ark of the Lord, blowing their horns. Again, the armed men marched both in front of the priests with the horns and behind the ark of the Lord. All this time the priests were blowing their horns. On the second day, they again marched around the town once and returned to the camp, and they followed this pattern for 6 days. On the 7th day, the Israelites got up at dawn and marched around the town as they had done before, but this time they worked around the town 7 times. The 7th time around, as the priests sounded the long blast on their horns, Joshua commanded the people, "Shout for the Lord." Has given you the town. Jericho and everything in it must be completely destroyed as an offering to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and others in her house were be spared for this, for she protected our spies. Do not take any of the things set apart for destruction, or yourselves will be completely destroyed, and you will bring trouble on the camp of Israel. Everything made from silver, gold, bronze, or iron is sacred to the Lord and must be brought into his treasury. When the people heard the sound of the ram's horn, they shouted as loud as they could. Suddenly the walls of Jericho collapsed, and the Israelites charging straight into the town and captured it. They completely destroyed everything in it with their swords, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep and goats and donkeys. Meanwhile, Joshua said to the 2 spies, "Keep your promise and go to the prostitute's house and bring her out, along with all her family." The men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, mother, brothers, and all her other relatives who were with her, and they moved her whole family to a safe place near the camp of Israel. Then the Israelites burned the town and everything in it. Only the things made from silver, gold, bronze, or iron were kept for the treasury of the Lord's house. So Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute and her relatives who were with her in the house, because she had hidden the spies Joshua sent to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. At that time, Joshua invoked this curse. May the curse of the Lord fall on anyone who tries to rebuild the town of Jericho at the cost of his firstborn son. He will lay its foundation. At the cost of his youngest son, he will set up its gates. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his reputation spread throughout the land. So the chapter I just read, Joshua chapter 6, certainly. Joshua 6 recounts the dramatic story of the Battle of the Jericho, where the walls of the city came tumbling down. Joshua 2 verse 5, and the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have given you Jericho in your hand, with its king and mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war, going around the city once. Thus you do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpet. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, then you hear the sound of the trumpet, and then all the people shall shout with a great shout. And the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, everyone straight before him." The context: the Lord gives Joshua specific instructions on how to conquer the city of Jericho. The Israelites are to march around the city once a day for 6 days, with the priests carrying trumpets. On the 7th day, they are to march around the city 7 times, and when the priests blow the trumpets, the people are to shout, and the walls of Jericho will collapse. This passage teaches the importance of obedience and faith in God's instructions, even when they seem unconventional or challenging. The Israelites had to trust in God's plan and follow his commands. Priestly It reminds us that God's ways are often different from our own. Even we should be willing to step out in faith and trust Him even when the path seems uncertain or unusual. The story of Jericho encourages us to have faith in God's power and to obey His guidance, knowing that He can bring down the barriers in our lives that may seem unsurmountable. Joshua verse 20. So the people shouted and trumpets were blown as soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. The Israelites followed God's instructions faithfully. They marched around Jericho and blew the trumpets and shout as His commanded. Miraculously, the walls of Jericho collapse, and the Israelites are able to enter the city and capture it. The epic power of faith in action and the fulfillment of God's promises. Through the obedience and united action of the Israelites, God demonstrates His faithfulness by bringing down the formidable walls of Jericho. It serves as a powerful reminder that when we trust in God, obey God, He can do the impossible and overcome the obstacles we face. And encourage us to have a courage and faith in God's ability to bring down the strongholds in our lives and lead us to victory. In summary, the story of Joshua 6 and the Battle of Jericho teaches us about the importance of obedience, faith, and trust in God's unconventional methods. It reminds us to follow God's instructions faithfully even when they may seem unusual or challenging. The account of Jericho encourages us to have faith in God's power to break down barriers and obstacles, knowing that He is faithful to fulfill His promises. So it says a prayer in this Bible. Father, I want to be able to give You glory by being honest. Help me to tell the truth about I need to confess. Amen. Okay. So let's get to this. So yeah, I met this guy on a dating app, music manager. He works for Tana Tucker, and he had this freaking pictures like from like 20 years ago, like his young pictures. He didn't have no updated pictures of himself on the freaking picture on the website. I found out because that's not what he really looks like, and he's like deceiving people on that freaking Facebook dating app. Anyway, and he thinks something's not wrong with that. It says it's generally not a good idea to use outdated pictures on your dating profile. Here are a few reasons: mispresentation, using pictures that don't accurately reflect your current appearance can feel misleading to potential matches. It says an inaccurate first impression. Not even if we're not dating, regardless. Dating purpose. The goal of dating profiles is to represent yourself authority to others. Can decide if they are interested. Outdated photos hinder that goal. Trust issues. Matches may feel deceived or distrustful upon meeting if you look significantly different than despite it. This damages connections. Safety concerns. Extreme cases using photos that look nothing like you could raise doubts about identity intentions and make people uncomfortable. Self-confidence, presenting an inaccurate reflection of your current look, shows self-assurance and helps attract those truly interested in you as you are now. Catfishing concerns, though perhaps unintentionally, very outdated pics could come across as potential deception, known as catfishing, which is never good for building relationships. Ideally, using photos taken within the last 6 months that honestly, despite your current appearance, if you're self-conscious, focus on showing your features clearly with natural light and smiles, authenticity, and confidence are most appealing online. And that's what he doesn't get. Like, there's something wrong with the whole picture. So I read Joshua chapter 5, and that was Joshua chapter 6 I read. I need some Bible highlighters, but I can't really buy them right now because I can't afford it because I have to pay this freaking big bill off next month. That credit thing for the dentist, probably have to pay like all my money next month, and then they're bringing down to like 700 RL. Then that big amount, like $1,500. That's a lot of money just going out to a freaking dentist bill that I can't really afford it, but I have to pay it off. I don't even like Snapchat. Watch, I'm gonna send a picture to her thing. They're gonna say it's me. So after I pay that off, I'm hoping to get out of here, go to somewhere different.